Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And welcome to our live today, which is going to be about the Yorkshire Ripper and the manhunt for him. And I hope you'll enjoy it. The Yorkshire Ripper case is a case that's very, very infamous or famous, depending on which way you want to look at it, in the UK and in Europe and in those true crime circles. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone outside of Europe cover the Yorkshire Ripper manhunt and murder campaign that was done by obviously Peter Sutcliffe. And this campaign of murder and the manhunt to catch the murderer, the Yorkshire Ripper, went on for 5 whole years. From the mid 70s, 1975, up until 1980. And this was a significant manhunt, and it was all over the media in Britain at the time. And it really, really changed Yorkshire and I guess Lancashire as well. Society, the north of England, it changed that society forever. And certainly a lot of places lost its sense of innocence, and as well, I feel people's attitudes towards sex workers and the kind of ugly, the kind of ugly way that people view them and see them as lesser people was kind of laid to bare. And I think that started a process where those attitudes were adjusted and were became more fair, I think. So let's get into it then. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, was born on the 2nd of June, 1946, in Shipley, West Riding, Yorkshire. And Yorkshire is in the north of England, and the counties in Yorkshire, or it kind of used to be split up, west of Riding, east of Riding, and those were the counties. But then Yorkshire was unified later on, and nowadays Shipley is just known as Yorkshire, not the west of Riding. So, like as it was when Sutcliffe was born. Sutcliffe was raised as a strict Catholic, which was his mother's faith. However, his father was an Anglican, and his father didn't really take too much kind of interest or focus in the upbringing of his sons, because Sutcliffe had a brother as well, so he wasn't an only child, and Sutcliffe witnessed his father be violent to his mother, and was also the victim himself of domestic abuse, domestic violence, when his father smashed a beer glass over his head as a child. And he was described commonly as a loner, but did keep a fairly close circle of friends. And this was basically just people from around his area that he associated with. So he did have friends despite what many people would think. I think the view of serial killers is that they're always loners, but I think mostly they aren't. They may have fewer friends and a smaller social circle than the average person, but I think very seldom are they completely, totally isolated loners. I think to be a serial killer, you do have to be able to hide in plain sight. I think if someone is too much of a loner, too much of a marginal figure, that they stick out as a suspect like a sore thumb. So I think a serial killer who is good at what they do uh, is able to hide in plain sight, and Sutcliffe did for a long, long time, because he was on paper a very unremarkable person and seemingly a very average person for the area, despite his, childhood with the domestic abuse, the domestic violence witnessed in the household. This was fairly typical. Of the area he grew up in and the time period he grew up in. So just because he was the victim of domestic abuse from his father and witnessed it being done on his mother, I don't think there's a direct correlation as to why he did what he did. Um, I think, as we'll get into a bit later, it was down to mental illness more than anything else, which could have been brought on or exacerbated by his traumas in early life. But not everyone who, is a victim of abuse as a child goes on to become a serial killer. It's if that was the case, we'd have a lot more than we actually do. But Sutcliffe left school age 15, as many working class boys did in at the time, and worked odd jobs, including as a grave digger. And whilst working at Bingley Cemetery, um, he claims to have been spoken to by a voice coming out of a grave uh, of a poor, which was the grave of a poor Polish labourer. And Sutcliffe said that the voice claimed to have been God and ordered him to kill female sex workers. So this is what Sutcliffe says. Sutcliffe was married in 74 to Sonia uh, Sherma, Sonia Sherma. Sorry, it's a Polish name. It's pretty hard for me to pronounce. And Sonia was a teacher who also suffered from schizophrenia. Sutcliffe was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, but it makes sense that his partner would also have schizophrenia. Uh, that would make sense to me. And during his killing campaign, he worked as a HGV driver, so like a trucker basically, and also did night shift as well at a printing factory. I think he would like move things around there, I think, at night to earn extra money. He targeted female sex workers and women whom he believed to be sex workers. But there is an anomalies to this. He would he had targeted and attacked women and killed women who were not sex workers. And there were occasions where he claimed he believed that they were, but there were other instances where he attacked women and they lived, and they were blatantly not sex workers, and he encountered them in places where you wouldn't expect to encounter sex workers. So like rural Halifax, like the kind of outskirts of Halifax and places like that. So this kind of theory put a place that he was only targeting sex workers, there's a few holes in it. I think he was saying that so that the police would investigate it less and people would care less about him killing. I think primarily he had a grudge against women, and I believe that he saw sex workers as an easy target, and as a way to kind of justify, in a sense, what he was doing to himself, maybe, and to other people in a really warped way. Police took 5 years to catch him, so he was doing this for 5 years, and obviously he used his job as a HGV driver or a trucker to commit the murders. So he committed them in several different towns and cities throughout Yorkshire and Lancashire, so like the north of England. And his job enabled him to do this. He kept odd hours and he was always on the move, and it enabled him to know the layouts of towns and cities throughout the north of England, and also have reasons as to why he would be in different places at different times. Wayside Jack, the Ripper hoaxer, was a man from the northeast of England who actually, during the investigation, sent in a tape, an audio recording that he made of himself. And on that tape, he claimed to be the Ripper and said that like there would be more victims in Liverpool or Manchester next. And police took this very seriously and searched all over Sunderland, Newcastle, the northeast, and those places. But it turned out that this guy was a hoaxer, and that he had just been he'd been lucky in terms of guessing some of the info about the murders that were not public to police. However, this was proven not to be the killer, the Ripper. This was a hoaxer, a guy doing it just to try and get attention from the public. And he was actually later caught by police in the 2000s, years after all this, 20 years after all this ended, basically, more than 20 years, because of the saliva that he licked on the letter, the envelope that he put the tape in when he sent it to the police, and because of him having convictions uh, post the Yorkshire Ripper investigation, they had his DNA on file, so they were able to put two and two together, and he admitted it. So, and this hoaxer caused significant disruption in the manhunt, and is probably why it took so long to actually capture Peter Sutcliffe, who, as we'll get into, was actually caught just driving with false plates. Had been interviewed in relation to the murders several times, but had never been charged. But eventually, after being taken in for the false plates, copped to it all. And Sutcliffe was arrested, like I said, on January 1981. So, like 6 years almost after he started, 5 years to be, precise. Um, in Sheffield for in the north of England, in Yorkshire for having false plates, and then whilst in police custody, confessed to all the murders. He was sentenced to 20 life sentences in May 1981, and was transferred to Broadmoor Mental Hospital in 1984 after being diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic like his wife, Sonia. He ultimately returned to prison in 2016 after being declared mentally fit, and died November 13th of COVID-19 and diabetes related complications in Wakefield prison. This is the timeline of Sutcliffe's killing campaign. His killing campaign lasted for 5 years, from 1975 to 1980, and his first victim was Wilma McCann, who was 28 years old, and she was his first known killing. She was killed in Chapeltown, the Chapeltown area of Leeds, and she was a sex worker. And alarm was first raised when her children were spotted in the early hours of the morning, waiting outside of a bus stop, unaccompanied by an adult, because that's where Wilma told them to wait for her after she was, done with her client, which ultimately ended up being Sutcliffe, who was her last ever client. And the children being at the bus stop raised the attention of the neighbours, and then this raised the alarm that Wilma was missing, and she was subsequently discovered, murdered and mutilated, not too far from where she lived. And then in the new year in 1976, he struck again. This was on January the 20th, and this was Emily Jackson, who was 42, and she was killed in Morley, Leeds. She was also a sex worker. And on the 5th of February 1977, Irene Richardson, who was 28, was killed in Chapeltown, Leeds. And then on the 20th, she was a sex worker. And on the 23rd of April 1977, Patricia Atkinson, 32, was murdered in her Bradford flat. She was a sex worker. Now, this is the only victim he had where he murdered her in a home, and it wasn't in his car or on waste ground or some rural area. This was the only one inside of a house. Um, and then on the 26th of June 1977, Jane McDonald, who was 16, was killed in Leeds City. She was his youngest murder victim, and she was the first that was not a sex worker. She was walking home from her job, and she was walking past a pub, a bar that was known to be frequented by sex workers at a late hour. And Sutcliffe claimed that he mistook her for a sex worker and regretted doing it in an interview after his capture. And then on the 1st of October 1977, Jean Jordan, aged 20, was killed in Manchester City. Now, this was the first attack and murder that took place outside of the county of Yorkshire, what we now know as the county of Yorkshire. This happened in Lancashire or Greater Manchester. Um, this happened in Manchester City, and then later in the next year, in 1978, the 21st of January, Yvonne Pearson, as 21, was killed in Bradford. Yvonne Pearson and Jean Jordan were both sex workers. And then on the 31st of January 1978, Helen Ritke, who was 18, was killed in Huddersfield. And then on the 16th of May 1978, Vera Millwood, 40, was killed in Manchester. And then on the 4th of April 1979, Josephine Whitaker, 19, a building society worker, was killed in Halifax. She was not a sex worker. She was killed walking home from work. And I think Sutcliffe just assumed any woman who was out late at night, was a sex worker, and was a target for him. But I don't believe it was that. I believe it was motivated by a hatred of women, as I said earlier on, and that the claiming they were prostitutes was an attempt to, in Sutcliffe's mind, justify what he did and demonize his victim. It's classic deflection, blame the victim techniques, and I think that that's why he was doing this. I think ultimately he was targeting any woman he could, and sex workers were just easy targets because they're on the margins of society, and because police oftentimes treat them, as we'll see in this investigation, don't treat them with the same dignity or respect as they would any other woman, which is so wrong. And then it makes them, uncomfortable or unwilling to report crimes to the police, and get justice, and also attacks on them are not taken as seriously as attacks on women who are not sex workers, because there's this false idea that by, being a sex worker that they're, putting themselves in harm. But it doesn't, just because someone is a sex worker, it doesn't mean that they deserve to be harmed. I mean, what kind of society do we live in? These women are vulnerable, and they're oftentimes the victims of, child abuse or drug abuse, and that trauma leads them on to sex work. And these are women who need, helping rather than harming, and it's just a terrible, that the mentality at the time, and still in some people, is that these women who were sex workers, who were his victims, mattered less because they were sex workers. And I think that that's appalling. I think that they mattered just as much as anybody else does. They have a right to live just like anyone else does, and you can agree or disagree with their line of work, but it doesn't mean they have a right to, be killed over it. It's outrageous. And then on the 1st of September 1979, Barbara Leach, 20, a student walking home, was murdered in Bradford. And 20th of August 1980, Marguerite Walls, 47, the oldest victim of Sutcliffe's, was killed in Leeds. And then on the 17th of November 1980, Jacqueline Hill, 20, was killed in Leeds, and she was a student walking home as well. And there are several survivors of Sutcliffe's, and Anna Roylansky, was attacked in Keighley and survived after a 12-hour brain operation. And in a documentary, Manhunt, the woman Anna Rodlinsky, she is being interviewed as part of the documentary, and she's having her hair done in a barber shop, and or hairdressers, should I say? And she's telling the young girl that's doing it about how she had to have her head shaved when she had this 12-hour brain operation that saved her life, and she described, just walking home and then just randomly being hit on the head with a hammer, and then all she remembers is just seeing blood pouring from her head, and she has claimed that she could barely remember, if at all, anything from that incident or just before it. For up to months afterwards, it was that severe an injury. She was very lucky to survive. And then on August 1975, Tracy Brown was attacked in Halifax, and she was only 14 at the time, and was not a sex worker. And this attack happened in rural Halifax. So Halifax isn't rural, but parts of it are, the outskirts of it are. And this wasn't the outskirts, this was on a country road. And she was walking and came across Sutcliffe, who was walking as well. And they were talking, and she didn't say she was a sex worker. There was nothing to suggest she was, and she was 14, and obviously a child, and Sutcliffe attacked her with a hammer anyway. And so this proves, lends to my theory that it was nothing about sex workers, that he used that as a kind of means to try and justify it, but ultimately it was any kind of woman. Any woman was a, or girl was a target for this sick bastard. And she was very lucky, Tracy Brown, not to have died. And she gave an accurate description of Sutcliffe to the police at the time, but was dismissed because she wasn't a prostitute. And this shows you how flawed this investigation was. Obviously, we have the Wayside Jack hoaxer disrupting it, and then at the same time we have the police, dismissing a perfectly reasonable report of a man who fitted the description that they had of Sutcliffe out there, and dismissed it just because it didn't fit the pattern that they thought that there was. As a detective, you follow the evidence, you listen to people. When it matches up, when someone gives an accurate description, you should take it seriously, and not be biased, and allow your mind to be totally open to where the evidence can take you. And sadly, the police in Yorkshire, investigating this case, did absolutely none of that, and they didn't do much to endear the trust of the local sex workers. The local sex workers, felt completely vilified and alienated, and looked down upon by the police, and this did them no favors in terms of investigating what happened. And then also in August 75, Olive Smelt was attacked in Halifax but survived. And then Anne Rooney was attacked in March 79 near Horsforth College and survived as well. And oh, hi Val, glad you could make it. I was I was worried no one would show up, but I'm glad you're here. So glad you could make it, despite everything that's going on, all the stuff you've got on your plate at the moment. I'm so glad you could make it. And yeah, we've been discussing the Yorkshire Ripper, and it's quite an intense case. A lot of issues coming up, and I've just got to the end of the whole timeline of his attacks, but it's really interesting. He attacked mainly sex workers in the mid 70s to 80s in the north of England, and he was doing this for 5 years. So the police were real slow at catching him, and I was just at this moment discussing the flaws in the police's investigation. The fact that when they were talking about this, they would describe when he would attack women who weren't prostitutes as being innocent victims, which would imply that in the police's head that women who were sex workers basically had it coming to them, which is appalling. It's so appalling. And I was saying earlier, like these women who are sex workers all over the world most of the time are, victims of child sex abuse and domestic abuse and drug addiction. And, these are the most vulnerable women in society. And for the actual police investigating this to make believe that they make it out to them and to the media and to society as a whole that they had it coming, that they were putting themselves in a position of danger by being sex workers. Absolutely not. A sex worker is there to trade money for sex, which is one of the oldest professions, if not the oldest, in the world. She's not there to be murdered. That attitude from the police did not in any way endear them in confidence to the women who were working as sex workers in Leeds. So oftentimes, if they were attacked and they survived, they wouldn't report it. So I'm sure that he did attack a lot more women who lived, but they just may have just showed up at the hospital, been treated, and just didn't report it. For fear of being ridiculed and treated meanly. And then when women would come in, sex workers would come in to report a murder or like a missing friend of theirs that they hadn't seen and that they were worried about was a victim, or to give a statement about one of their friends who'd gone off and then with a punter, with a John, and then been found dead. When they'd go into the police headquarters and they'd sit down on a chair, police would make comments like, well, we better burn that chair after she's gone. And they could hear this. And the way these women were treated was just awfully. And I'm glad as a society we've moved on mostly from that attitude, but this could have been solved a lot quicker by the sex workers being treated like human beings by the press and the police, and by them having this confidence in the police. They would have been able to come forth and give more information and a detailed descriptions, and they would have caught him a lot quicker. But I'm so interested in he was going after women that would not be looked for. Exactly, Val. It's terrible, and it's terrible. The sickening. I completely agree with you. The views that the police had on it. And yeah, he like I said earlier in the live before you made it, I believe he did target women who were not sex workers. He targeted women in areas that were not the red light district, that were like rural country where there are no sex workers, there are no prostitutes, and he attacked a 14-year-old girl with a hammer, and she was obviously not a sex worker. Not that it would make it okay if she was, but his argument that he was only targeting sex workers, that he was given this mission by God to cleanse the streets of prostitutes, was an absolute lie. He hated women and was getting his aggressions and violence out on them. And I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but this line of conversation, and I didn't put it in my notes either, but I'd remembered it. He had been cheated on by Sonia, his wife, who was also a paranoid schizophrenic. So a real toxic couple there. And he committed his first attack after he discovered she was having an affair with an American traveling salesman. So this hatred he had of his wife, he didn't, divorce Sonia. He didn't leave Sonia. He didn't air his grievances with Sonia. He took it out on, like you said, Val, women who wouldn't be missed, who wouldn't be looked for, who were the most vulnerable in society, who he could, in his mind, justify what he was doing. And it's just absolutely appalling how they were treated and how they were described, how it was all described and covered by the media. It's absolutely insane. And I'm just, glad that we have come further than that as a society, where if this happened now in England, the police would be a lot better with sex workers and with women and who were the victims. But this I think uh, uh, excuse of his that he was, schizophrenic and he was on this mission from God. I think he was very much schizophrenic. He was diagnosed with that later in life, but I think he was a good liar as well. And I think ultimately he was motivated by hatred of women, by violent misogyny, and he was just a disgusting predator who, never picked a fight with anyone who could fight back. He, like you say, Val, he picked on the most vulnerable in society, and it really shows. But during the investigation, um, a lot of the time, the police would, uh, you know, go 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 through really, really bad procedures. Like they would just they would dress up female police officers as sex workers, and in hopes of catching him, and they'd give them minimal to no protection, and it was all done very disorganized, that those operations, which never caught him or proved fruitful. As I said earlier, Sutcliffe was caught driving with false plates. He had been interviewed because his car registration had been noted going in the red light districts of Leeds. But when he was interviewed, his wife always gave him, Sonia always gave him an airtight alibi. So I'm pretty sure that she knew he was doing this, and he may have framed it in a way of, well, I'm only doing it because you had that affair, so you've got a cover for me. Which is peculiar. It's weird that he would kill these women who did absolutely nothing to him, but never laid a hand on Sonia. Uh, when she had the affair, he never beat Sonia. She never reported that he was ever violent with her, which is bizarre to me. Uh, that he was so violent with women who'd done absolutely nothing to him, but a woman who had humiliated him, who had cheated on him, he did absolutely nothing to. He was completely loyal to, in a sense. And played down her involvement in it. So it's very, very bizarre. It's very bizarre. Absolutely, Val. It's difficult, and to get into his mind. Anyone's mind, but especially someone like him, and uh, possible. There's this goes a little deeper as well. There's another part of all this that I wanted to discuss. Was the Jimmy Savile connection. What's this? Did the wife ever say anything about her involvement, or did she pretend she didn't know? Yeah, she pretended she didn't know and divorced him afterwards, and always claimed that she was in the dark, but she gave him alibis. So either he'd lied to her about what he was, and she just did it. But I'm fairly certain that she knew full well what he was doing, and and that he said to her, it's like, it's your fault I'm doing this because you cheated on me and it's driven me crazy. But there were signs that he was like that, because he was sat in the car with a friend from work, and they were looking at prostitutes who were out on the street, offering themselves to clients, to potential clients, and then Sutcliffe made a comment like, "Oh, they're disgusting. Wouldn't you love to just run them down?" And then his friend thought he was just joking, but that's a thing to say in the middle of like a guy is out there who is murdering these women in this area. So Sutcliffe wasn't the most um, tactful person. He didn't last for 5 years because he was smart. He lasted for 5 years because the police were stupid, fundamentally, and they were damn lucky that when they pulled him for false plates, that he copped to it, because all the times that they interviewed him, he gave alibis, and it was backed up by Sonia, his wife. So there's nothing really that the police could do if they had, unless they had anything more compelling. But like, he was one of thousands of men who frequented the red light district in Leeds. And another uh, serial killer that we will be covering on this channel that I'm kind of surprised I haven't already covered is Harold Shipman, the Dr. Death, who murdered his patients, who murdered 250 of his elderly patients. Harold Shipman used to frequent the red light district in Bradford and Leeds around this time. So, Sutcliffe isn't the only serial killer who was caught in the mix. So that's a weird crossing of worlds of two of Britain's most famous and prolific serial killers. Obviously, Shipman really outdid Sutcliffe on the numbers. Not that it's a competition, but and they were obviously very different guys. But as you say, Val, the whole case is very peculiar. But there is a Jimmy Savile connection, another famous criminal that is in a weird way connected to this case, and the connection is pretty bizarre. Jimmy Savile, and those of you who don't know, was a DJ, television show host, and prolific charity fundraiser in Britain. But after his death, was unmasked as being Britain's worst paedophile, who was abusing kids sexually whilst having a TV show on, on the BBC that was called Jim'll Fix It. That was literally about making kids' dreams come true. So that's like the most ideal thing for a paedophile to have a TV show watched by millions of kids that was about making their dreams come true. Like, what better way to entice a child than that? And Salva was very close with the establishment, the royal family, many prime ministers. He had friends absolutely everywhere. And obviously, after his death, he was unmasked as being a paedophile and possibly worse, as well as a necrophiliac as well. So he really was a prolific pervert and had no limits to what he was willing to do sexually and get off to. And he was doing it seemingly in plain sight. But the connection to Peter Sutcliffe and this case is rather interesting, because the majority of the murders happened in Leeds, which is where Jimmy Savile was born and lived, as well as having many other houses near enough all of his life, from 1926 to 2011. Oh yeah, we'll definitely be doing a live about the Doctor soon. That's certainly on the list, Val. Harold Shipman, I'll send you documentaries about him and a TV movie. And if you see my community post that I did just before this, I put a TV movie about the manhunt of this case for the Yorkshire Ripper, and I think you'd really love it. I think the Brits and the Irish do true crime murder movies about real cases way better than America, because the ones about the Watts case and Casey Anthony and a lot of the other ones I absolutely detest. I think are awful. But I prefer US TV shows to British ones. But in terms of true crime murder movies, I think Britain and Ireland do it way better. And I think viewers in general would really love these movies that are available for free on YouTube, that have a cast of great British and Irish actors, of people who really give it. These aren't like movie of the week style actors. These are guys and men and women who really can bring it. And the movie Manhunt about the Ripper trial is really delves into, obviously, the police side of it. It's of the police's point of view uh, of the Detective Oldfield, who was the main guy on the investigation until he was George Oldfield, until he was taken off for health reasons. And the case, many believe that the case basically killed him. He died not long after it ended because of, I think, the stress of it all. And I couldn't imagine that. But it would have been aided if the attitudes of him and his officers were a bit more human towards the victims, and a bit more proactive in their investigations. And like, I keep getting detracted, but yes, I think a lot of cases were not solved because the police work because of the police work, of sloppy investigations, or just incompetency. I completely agree, Val. I think sometimes the cops can be like, right, this is just another case, especially when it's victims who are either homeless, drug addicts, prostitutes. Police, sadly, a lot of the time look down upon these people rather than seeing them as the victims of society, rather than as being seen them as a lot of them victims of child sexual abuse. Not rather than having a heart and being a good person, they look down on them. They don't care about them as much as some banking CEO, or God forbid that healthcare guy who was killed, who, you know, was shot by Luigi Mangione. They put all their efforts in for those parasites who, I'm not saying it was right that the healthcare CEO was murdered, but this guy was a parasite who made money off people's misery. Very much like a heroin dealer or somebody like that. I would see no difference. And the police put all their focus in finding his killer. But when it's a prostitute, when it's a drug addict, when it's a homeless person, sadly, like you say, Val, a lot of the times they just don't care, and they see it as being too much of a as being, too, as not requiring their effort. And if I was a detective, I would put absolutely my full efforts into absolutely every case equally, because that's what you join up for. You join up, if you're a good detective, to solve cases without prejudice. That's the way it should be, but sadly in practice a lot of the times it isn't. um yeah, no worries, Val. No worries at all. I'm glad you're here. So glad you're here. And this reminds me of a case recently in Portland, Oregon, where someone was going after drug addicts. I don't know if you remember that. Yes, I do. I do remember that. And I remember the discussions that we were having in our community at the time, the true crime community, about how, victims, people who are on the margins of society. Look at, obviously, Gilgo Beach, Huberman is very much like Sutcliffe, uh, in the sense that of who he was targeting, vulnerable members of society. But Huberman was having sex with his victims and then killing them, whereas Sutcliffe, I think, only ever had sex with them once or twice, one or two of his victims before killing them. Most of the time, uh, he'd kill them, and wouldn't have sex. And this also, I keep getting sidetracked, but I keep things lead to things, and it's good that you're here, Val, because like little bits of information trigger other bits that I didn't put in my notes that are valuable pieces of information. So it's always a pleasure having you here, because you always help me so much with the lives. But yeah, I do remember Sutcliffe admitted that he had went to a prostitute around the time of Sonia's affair, and because he couldn't get aroused right away, the prostitute made fun of him and mocked him. And then he eventually was able to perform and to have sex, but that annoyed him that she'd insulted him like that, and he said that he was very violent with her during the sex. So maybe like that to me seems like the moment where it snapped in him, and I think that he enjoyed the violence more than the sex, and at a point the violence became his form of sex, and in a bizarre way. And then occasionally he would, have sex with his victims, but most 90% of the time he wouldn't. He was more concerned with just violence. And I think that's why I think in a sense as well, he was using that, oh, I'm only being violent with them, I'm most often than not having sex with them, as making him seem like he was somehow the good guy, the moral one, which is absurd. It's like kind of warped mind we're dealing with here, dangerous guy. Uh, well, I always get sidetracked when I did it too. Yeah, and we all do, we all do. But it's great because it can lead to other bits of information, like that we don't have in our notes, that we didn't plan for, and it can open the door to other other things of other lines of discussion. So I really do appreciate it. It's good, but back to what I was saying about Jimmy Savile. Obviously, he was sounds like some of these people, they only get off from the violence. Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's, sadly, in our world, we have some people who have like a fucked up brain chemistry to where the only time they can get aroused or any kind of relief is through hurting people, inflicting pain. And it's really, worrying and disturbing that there are people out there who are like that. And obviously there are people who engage in BDSM and those types of sexual fantasies, and I don't condemn that at all. I think when it's consensual and it's done between two people who are interested in this thing, and it's safe, and there are safe words and things like that, that's totally fine. Like, I have no objection to that at all. But it's when people who like doing it to people who don't want it done to them, who like hurting people, who at random, without reason. It's terrifying that this world is full of people like that. And I think that a lot of the world leaders are actually those types of people, as obviously in our Epstein lives we've discussed. We can see that a lot of them have this disposition, and it makes sense as to why a lot of them are such war hawks. They want to see pain and suffering on a global stage, and they don't care who dies. They don't care who gets PTSD. I think it gets them off. I think it gives them sexual gratification that these world leaders, that they're causing war in the same way it gave Sutcliffe sexual gratification to inflict violence on these innocent women. All of them were innocent. It's of course, and that's a completely different story. Exactly. What the fuck is wrong with our world? We really need a readjustment of the energies and of the power systems. And I think the readjustment of the energies is coming. And I just hope that it's an event that's peaceful and doesn't, take a bunch of suffering for us all to finally wake up. That's what I hope. But the Jimmy Savile angle is an interesting one in his connection to this case. Savile, like I said, was a famous DJ, TV show host, but was also a prolific paedophile, and was exposed after his death, and I think was very much protected by the establishment. And I'm very shocked that there is nothing of Savile in the Epstein files, but I think that that's more to do with the fact that Savile's uh, path may have crossed with Epstein, and probably did, because they both were in royal circles and both knew former Prince Andrew. But Savile's partners in crime, shall we say, were all British, and Savile didn't have the same pull with Americans because he wasn't a name in America. No Americans really know him, other than when British people or Irish people or Europeans in general talk about him in true crime cases. He wasn't on the television in America. To describe him and what his significance was to Britain was he was very much like Dick Cavett, not Dick Cavett, more like Dick Clark. He presented a show, Top of the Pops, which was like Dick Clark's American Bandstand, very much of that format, and then did Jim'll Fix It, the children's show, which is also almost made him almost like a Mr. Rogers type figure to children, although he was always very unusual, and there was always this kind of undercurrent of sinisterism to Savile, and kind of grossness to the way he looked and presented himself. But I think his charity work is what redeemed him in a lot of people's minds, and made him so beloved to people more so than his actual demeanor and presentation as a TV presenter. But his connection is interesting to this. Irene Richardson was found, who was a victim of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, was found very close to Jimmy Savile's flat in Roundhay Park in Leeds. And during the investigation, Saville was a suspect because he, like many others, was known by Leeds Vice Squad and was known to frequent the red light district for prostitutes, both male and female, in that time period. And both of age and underage, and the police in Leeds knew this, and the victim, Irene Richardson, was found with a large bite mark on her breast. So that this was quite a different to Sutcliffe's usual murders. You know, he usually mutilated them after the murder, but she was bit on the breast before her murder. And they took a cast of Saville's teeth, but they didn't match the teeth of what was ultimately proven to be Sutcliffe. However, Saville, years later, said to his, on again, off again sort of girlfriend, Sue Hims, who he kept private because he liked the idea that he was this bachelor and no woman could tie him down. It was very much part of his persona. But she said in an interview after his death that Saville, when they used to take drives around Yorkshire, he'd point to locations and say, and including the one near his house where Irene Richardson was found, and he would say, there's a victim of the Yorkshire Ripper who was found there. And you know something? He didn't work alone. And Saville used to say the reason he didn't get married was because of brain damage, which was an interesting thing to say. He said women are brain damage, which is really, really weird. And I remember hearing him say that on an interview before he was exposed as a paedophile, before he died, and thinking, there's something really bizarre about that comment of Saville saying women are brain damage. Like, what does he mean by that? Like, what the fuck does that mean? And Irene Richardson was found with a bite mark on her breast, but she was smashed in the back of the head with a hammer. And when Saville made that comment in an interview that was being done at his penthouse in Leeds in Roundhay Park, right, the park where Irene was murdered, he was looking over into the park at the spot where she was found, as he said, women are brain damage. That's why I'm not married. Women are brain damage. And now someone could think, oh, they drive him insane. They're emotional. They have needs that Jimmy doesn't want to have to fulfill. He wants physical. He doesn't want emotional. He doesn't want a relationship or anything like that. Like, that's what people would assume he meant. But Jimmy Saville enjoyed putting things out there in plain sight, and would make comments in many interviews that would hint at abuse, hint that he was a predator, but pass it off in a joking way. And he loved doing that because he was a psychopath, because he liked hiding in plain sight. He got a kick out of it. And that comment where he said women are brain damaged. So it's very possible that Saville was in cahoots with Sutcliffe on some of these murders. And gets even weirder. Hold on, Val. This gets even weirder. Later, Sutcliffe was sent to Broadmoor Mental Hospital, which is Britain's, most famous or infamous mental asylum, mental hospital for the criminally, not just criminally insane, but people with severe mental disorders, not just people who've committed crimes who are mentally ill, but mentally ill people in general. But most people associate it with people like Peter Sutcliffe and other murderers who were sent there. But Jimmy Saville, I mentioned earlier, like, he was a big charity guy, which I think he used as a kind of cover for his crimes. You see the mafia guys back in the day would have the soup kitchens, and that was their charity work. That gave them a good image in the community, and it would deflect negative publicity about them. People would say, oh, they've gone and killed someone, and be like, oh, what, they run soup kitchens, they can't be that bad. They give us something to eat. So like when stuff would be hinted at with Jimmy Savile, maybe being a paedophile, people would say, oh, well, he does so much for charity. How could he be a bad guy? He's raised all this money for charity, goes into hospitals visiting people. And one of the hospitals he visited was Broadmoor, where Sutcliffe was held. And Sutcliffe and Savile were very, very close and would always spend time with each other. In fact, Savile described Sutcliffe in the media at the time as being good as gold. So Jimmy Savile, whilst he was, this beloved, family entertainer, described a man who was in prison for the multiple mass murders of women as being good as gold. So this is how untouchable and fainted and worshipped Jimmy Savile was and powerful he was, that he could make comments like that and no one would really press him about it. I go back and watch these interviews with him and I'm just like, how the fuck did people not realize what a psychopath this guy is or was? It's insane. But hindsight is a 2020 thing. But like Savile and Sutcliffe spent a lot of time with each other when Savile would visit, and obviously Jimmy Savile would brag to people about his closeness with Peter Sutcliffe, and seemed very impressed and proud of the fact that he had this friend who was a mass murderer, and he seemed to like it. And Sutcliffe said after um, Savile died and was exposed as a paedophile that it's all a load of rubbish and that Jimmy Savile was set up and framed and that he wasn't like that. He was a really nice man. So this connection between these two, like, could it have gone back to prior to the meeting at Broadmoor? Could Savile have known Sutcliffe somehow? Could they have met whilst both in the red light district, and he would have known? Savile was a celebrity at this time. Savile had been famous in Leeds since the 1940s, the late 40s, early 50s. So Savile was a big name at this time. So if Sutcliffe saw him and was like, oh my God, it's Jimmy Savile, and they got talking, and they found they had quite a lot in common. Who knows? I'm not saying for sure, but it's possible. Hi, Amber. Glad you could join us. So glad you could join us. We're just about to finish, so if you could catch the replay, I'd really appreciate that. But it's been a really long and detailed discussion about a case that's like highlights British true crime discussions, I think, and is one that sadly isn't really discussed very much or known by people in the North American true crime audience. And there's many good films, movies that have been made about it. If you're new to the case, and they can kind of bring you up to speed on everything. And I'll be sharing that and some of my other favorite British and Irish like real true crime uh movies, movies based on true crime that have been made. And I think, like I was saying earlier, that I think that the ones made in Europe are a lot better than the American ones. The ones about the Watts case really pissed me off. I thought that they were really bad and didn't really portray the possibilities that NK was involved, and it was too safe. But I think that with the British and Irish ones, they're not afraid to take risks with it. And I think that also the quality of the actors in these is marginally better. I think that the people that put their name forward for these types of productions in Britain is always is of a higher caliber actor than the ones that end up getting them in America. A lot of the coverage of the Watts case is messed up and pisses me off too. Well, absolutely. I think the way, again, Shanann was treated by certain elements of the press, goes into what we were saying earlier about how women who are victims of crime are so often blamed and shamed not in the same way that men are. Not always. I think male victims of sex abuse are oftentimes not taken as seriously or very seriously. But I think generally speaking, women, when they are victims of crime, get a much more unfair shake and portrayal in the media, and like they're scrutinized in a way that men just aren't. And I thought it was really gross how Shanann was treated. And as I said earlier, I think it was really gross how the victims of Peter Sutcliffe and how sex workers in general were portrayed by and viewed by the media at the time and by the police. And as we said earlier, even now, victims of crime who are on the margins of society, who may be addicts, homeless, or prostitutes, aren't looked at with the same care and consideration as anybody else. And I think that that's completely wrong. I think that in these cases, when we're doing true crime, we can't be so detached. We've got to remember that these are all people who had families, who had loved ones, who had lives, who had dreams, who had ambitions, and they were brutally taken away from them in like a horrific way. So like, I really pride myself on having respect for the victims and doing them justice when I do these lives. This isn't a cash grab for me. I do this because I'm passionate about true crime, and if I make money from this one day, it will always be, like I said, put back into this, the quality of the lives, the quality of this. Like, I don't want to make money off the backs of people who have been through tragedy, and that's my view of it all. But thank you everyone for joining us this evening, afternoon, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. It's been a really difficult case to cover, but I think a really important one because it raises so many ethical and social issues and ethical issues about how investigations should take place, and how when you have a biased police force, you have a police force that doesn't view sex workers as being as deserving of justice as anybody else, you're gonna get a, a situation where the killer gets to get away with it for so long, and we can't have that. You join the police to stop murderers, no matter who they kill. You do it to uphold the law, and that didn't happen, sadly, in this case. And it's certainly one that we as true crimers can learn a lot from. But thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Val, for being here throughout most of the live, despite all you've got going on. It really means the world to me, and it's such a pleasure and an honor with all your having you here, and all the encouragement you give me. So much love to you, and take care. And thank you so much, Amber, for being here and making it, and always supporting the channel and pushing me. It really means a lot, and giving me the platform. I'll have to come on your live streams or live again soon, because I've missed being on your panels. If you'll have me, of course. I don't want to force myself on there, but I would love to be up on one of your lives again soon. I always really enjoy it so much. It's a great community that you've got around you, and great. I was great listening whilst I was. We all have unfortunate moments with the autocorrect, Amber. I'm not going to laugh at you too much for that. But I understood. It was probably cooking. It is usually dinner time when you're in here. But thank you very much for being here, and we end with a moment of laughter that can bring some balance to a very dark subject. So thank you everyone, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Goodbye.